That's right, you bastards. It's time for Overrated, Underrated, or Properly Rated Part 4. Without further ado, let's get this shit started. No offense to people with irritable bowel syndrome. Mike Midwood. Danny Amendola. Undeniably limited in terms of talent, white, but a value monster in St. Louis and a major contributor to the second New England dynasty, especially in the playoffs. Well, he was another handsome, short, white, scrappy slot wide receiver that Brady and Belichick dominated the league with for almost a decade. He wasn't as good as Welker or Edelman, and nobody will confuse him for a great player, but he was clutch. Also, he has had sex with lots of hot babes. Verdict, properly rated. AB 28. Marvin Harrison. He was a fantastic receiver with the Colts, but people tend to think he's overrated because he had Peyton Manning throwing him the football, and he is such a class act too. Well, he was a legitimately great receiver in the regular season, although I think guys like Randy Moss and Terrell Owens could have put up his numbers with Peyton. He is still an all-time great and belongs in the Hall of Fame, but man, he was just really bad in the playoffs. But you're right, just an absolutely swell guy and class act. Verdict, properly rated. Luke Plazier, hope I'm saying that right. Priest Holmes had the greatest 3-year stretch of any running back ever, but is rarely talked about. I would love to hear your thoughts on him. Well, Holmes to me is a lot like Terrell Davis, from the short peak to the injuries to the questions about whether his success was system-based. I don't think you can put up the stats that he did from 2001 to 2003 without being legitimately great, but he did play with a loaded offensive line full of multiple Hall of Famers, and also Larry Johnson replaced him and was also an All-Pro. I think Holmes was a guy who was also very good, but in the right place at the right time. Verdict, properly rated. Jaden Ramos. The Boys. Just started watching and absolutely love the show. Would love to hear your thoughts. Also, you're killing it. Keep it up. Thank you. No offense to Hernandez. I am a huge fan of The Boys. I love the show and also the comics, although I do think the show is better. The comics were also very good and I think had an excellent twist at the very end. The show is very rarely boring and the violence is so over the top that I honestly can't help but laugh at it when it happens. Homelander makes the show go though, and I cannot wait for season 4 already. For as popular as it is, I think it's even better than the hype. Verdict, underrated. Houston Herzberg. John Havlicek. He's got the accolades and consistent stats to put him in the top 20-30 range on the all-time greats list, but seems to be discredited like most players from the 60s and 70s for the era he played in. In my opinion, he's one of the greatest small forwards ever and was a vital piece in the dominant Celtics run. Well, Hondo is one of the rare outliers of guys from the 60s and 70s who could fit in today. He was an elite athlete and had insane endurance thanks to being born with oversized lungs. He was never a dominant player or won MVP, but he did go 8-0 in the finals, if that thing kind of rocks your boat. And he won a finals MVP and he finished with over 26,000 points, so he should get more recognition on the all-time list in my opinion. Verdict, underrated. Caleb the Verger. What are your thoughts on March Madness? It is widely considered the greatest postseason in sports by far. It is heaven for viewers, but some criticize the legitimacy of the tournament because the best team usually doesn't win the whole thing. Well, as a kid, I was a huge college basketball fan, but now I find it mostly unwatchable outside of the tournament. As you said, due to it being single elimination, it can lead to some wonky champions, but to me, the tournament is also a bit of a ruse. It gets praised for all the Cinderella runs, and that takes up all the attention and all the hype, and anything can happen is the reputation that it has, but guess what? A blue blood school always ends up winning in the end, no matter what. It's a great illusion. Verdict, overrated. James Wilkins. Sidney Crosby. He was an absolute legend almost all of his career and is unfortunately an even bigger what if due to his injuries. Most people don't count him in the absolute top echelon of players anymore, despite him being an amazing grinder, no offense to Urban Meyer, and a point per game player. Well, I don't watch much hockey, but I do know Crosby has been one of the faces of the league for years. I also know he has dealt with injuries that have stunted his career totals. Just looking at how he's produced when healthy on a per game basis, I think it's really impossible to say he's overrated, although he does have absolutely no personality. Verdict, properly rated. Cyber Ogie. Fortnite. Shrugged off as a children's game by many, but it's actually one of the most cohesive and fun to play multiplayer games out there. Would love to hear your thoughts, Barry. I have never once played Fortnite in my entire life, and honestly, I don't think I'm any worse off because of it. Maybe if I was younger, I would have gotten into the game, but I'm a man with 2 working testicles, so I didn't. Verdict, overrated. Mahalo Maximovic. Your thoughts on Aaron Hernandez? Dude was a beast in college and got to that start in NFL. Most people don't know that he had a better rookie season than Gronk. He was on the path to be a Hall of Famer, but he can only blame himself for what happened. Well, I don't think he was on the path to be a Hall of Famer. That's one thing. He was a famous respecter of life. He had all the talent in the world, as people have stated many times. I think strictly looking at him as a player, he could have become an all-pro caliber player eventually, but he was never going to be better than Gronk. And in 3 years, he never had a 1,000-yard season and missed a lot of games with injuries. I think people overrate his on-field career because his story is so tragic. Verdict, overrated. Noah Edwards. Jason Taylor. Always felt he was underrated when talking about great defensive ends, and that could be because he was on bad Dolphins teams. I would love to hear your take on it. Keep up the good content. Well, thanks a bunch, Noah. I mean, first of all, with Jason Taylor, the man is ridiculously handsome. Let's just admit that. And his sister's a babe, too. Why the hell do some people have to be so attractive? Anyways, I would say that he flew under the radar a little bit relative to other Hall of Famers, but he still got recognized for his great play enough, I believe. He won a Defensive Player of the Year award, made 6 Pro Bowls, and was first team All-Pro 3 times. So for me, verdict, properly rated. Ben H. The Beatles. They're obviously a great band who have had a lasting influence that is still seen to this day, but should they be more or less universally considered the greatest band of all time, or should others be in that conversation? Well, the Beatles have some songs that I enjoy, and I think they're objectively a good band. Maybe that's just my whiteness talking, but still, I've always been a bit puzzled as to why they are seen as the best band ever by many. Maybe it's because they were the first real global rock and roll band. I don't know. Timing is everything. I don't view music as a competition like others do, but there are still many artists and bands that I listen to and like more than the Beatles. Verdict, overrated. EGR 3232. Josh Hamilton. Yes, he missed the majority of his prime, but from 2008 to 2011, I believe the notorious drug hater was one of, if not the most feared hitters in the league. No offense to Joe Mixon. He would have been a Hall of Famer if he played his entire career. I don't think Hamilton was overrated at his best with the Rangers when he was winning MVPs and going to back-to-back World Series, but his drug addiction got his career off to a late start, as you mentioned, and he ended up falling off quickly once he joined the Angels with a big contract. So he was really only great for about 4 or 5 years. I also think he's a con artist who took advantage of people's sympathy, as his post-baseball career shows. He was a massive waste of talent and seems like a piece of shit. Verdict, overrated. Joe, The Shining, one of Stanley Kubrick's best movies, if not his best. I think it's the GOAT of horror films. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Barry. Well, I'll be real, as a horror aficionado, I am not a huge fan of The Shining. It's very drawn out and, quite honestly, pretty boring. It's not a terrible film, but I've just never really been that scared by Jack Nicholson's descent into madness the way so many people seem to be. Here's Johnny was a cool scene, but I'm sorry, it's just not my bag. Verdict, overrated. Joshua Hawkins. Mike Krzyzewski, I love him and he's had so much success, but even as a lifelong Duke fan, I feel like he's choked away some seasons with some absolutely stacked teams. Your thoughts? Well, due to my disinterest in college basketball, I've never really hated Duke or Coach K as much as other people, so I'm able to look at his career pretty objectively. I don't know how any person can say he's overrated because he's accomplished more than pretty much every college basketball coach ever besides arguably John Wooden. I mean, yeah, he didn't win with some talented squads, but you can say that about pretty much every top program. Verdict, properly rated. T1R3D. George Gervin. He was a very good scorer for his time and criminally underrated as a player. Gervin is like the original but inferior version of Kevin Durant. The Charmander to KD's Charizard, if you will. While Gervin's scoring ability was certainly not overrated, he was pretty one-dimensional and his teams never won anything important, although he did come very close to making the finals in 1979, but blew a 3-1 lead. No offense to Steph Curry. Verdict, properly rated. Mark Engelmeyer. Since you're such a huge Halloween fan, I would like to hear your thoughts on Black Christmas. The original 1974 version, not the 2 shitty remakes. To me, it seems like that does not get enough love when it should, especially since it came out before Halloween. I might even go so far as to say Black Christmas is superior to the original Halloween, my favorite film ever. When I finally got around to watching it a few years ago, I was completely blown away by how good it was. I was not expecting it to be anywhere near that good. The atmosphere is great, the suspense scenes are legit, the villain is extremely unsettling, and there are even some funny scenes in there too. It's all around just an incredible film. Verdict, underrated. Luke the Duke. Dale Earnhardt, who died in the greatest tragedy of 2001. I disagree. The greatest tragedy of 2001 was Drew Bledsoe getting hurt and opening the way for Tom Brady. Is thought by many to be better than the statistically superior Jimmy Johnson because he raced in a more challenging era and with less artificial playoff nonsense at the end of the season. Thought. Look, I don't know shit about NASCAR and I don't pretend to, but any man who helped storm the beaches of Normandy on D-Day like Earnhardt deserves everybody's utmost respect. He also had an incredible mustache that let everybody know he was the alpha in the room at all times. Verdict, underrated. AVG. Dragon Ball. One of the most popular anime of all time with many different series and manga to show for it, but it might not seem to hold up with many other shows that have come out in recent times. While you're right, some of the content in the original Dragon Ball definitely doesn't hold up well today, Master Roshi, but it is still a great show, albeit a little slow at times. I didn't enjoy it as much as I did its sequel, Dragon Ball Z, but it had a lot more humor and it's easy to see why it became one of the most successful anime and manga franchises ever. Verdict, properly rated. Shiny Thighplosion. Vincent Kennedy McMahon. McMahon might no longer be involved with the WWE, but that does not change the fact that he is a man with legendary amounts of class and integrity. All joking aside, I never got into wrestling Gosling, like many others my age, and McMahon has reportedly done a lot of bad things, so I'm no fan of his. Still, nobody can deny his gigantic impact on pro wrestling, for better or worse. Verdict, properly rated. Max Brosnahan, Hereditary. It's often viewed as the best modern horror movie. Since you're an avid horror fan, I'm curious to see what you think of it, and if you disagree, what is your favorite horror movie of the 2010s? Well, I don't know if I have a favorite horror movie of the 2010s. I'd really have to think about it. I think Hereditary is definitely up there, though, because I saw it a few years back and I did really enjoy it. Spoiler alert, the scene where the little girl's head gets taken off by the telephone pole was very, very haunting. I'm not usually a fan of possession, ghost-type horror films, so I was pleasantly surprised here. Still, I don't think it's underrated because it's gotten so much praise. It's way better than Midsommar, though. Verdict, properly rated. General Shepard, Julio Jones. A lot of people overlook him now, but don't realize how huge of a talent he was for about a 5 or 6 year span. I wouldn't say Julio was overlooked at all. I think he was rightfully considered in the discussion as best wide receiver in the league for a good 4 to 5 years. I think the last few years have shown he has fallen off a bit due to injuries. His lack of touchdowns and being weirdly subpar in the red zone has always been weird to me, but knowing Brady's luck, he'll stay healthy in Tampa and put up all-pro numbers again. Eat Arby's. Verdict, properly rated. Jason Keller, Mickey Mantle, one of the greatest to ever play in the MLB and in the sport in the 1950s. How would he have fared without Joe DiMaggio on the Yankees? Well, Mantle and DiMaggio were only teammates for one season, so I don't really think DiMaggio had much of an impact on Mantle's career. I think Mantle had the ability to be the best hitter of all time. However, he never came close to reaching his potential. Some of that was bad luck, like his injury as a rookie in the World Series in 1951 when Joe DiMaggio was his teammate, that took away his lightning speed forever because the medical options at the time weren't as good as they are today. But most of his underachieving falls on him. He liked to drink and fuck more than work, and I can't say I blame him, but it speaks to his talent that he was still top 15 player ever while reaching maybe 60% of his full potential. Verdict, properly rated. Anja, Brandon Roy, not too well known by younger NBA fans, but was a monster for a few years before injuries. I would argue he would have been a top 5 shooting guard of all time had he stayed healthy. Well, nobody will ever know how good Roy could have been for sure since his knees betrayed him right as he was entering his peak prime years. Do I think he would have been as good as guys like LeBron, Durant, Steph, or even Kobe? No, but he could have been a consistent staple for second or third team All-NBA like a Paul Pierce or a Paul George. Does that make him a top 5 shooting guard of all time if he stays healthy? It might have been borderline. Verdict, properly rated. Braden Selby, Soulja Boy, arguably one of the world's greatest and most honored inventors, having introduced to us the internet, video games, and the year 2007. Well, this is just one man's opinion, but to me, Soulja Boy is a national hero who deserves respect forever for his impact on the music industry in the late 2000s. He had the world in a stranglehold in 2007 with Crank That and saved countless lives with his follow-up hit Kiss Me Through the Phone. He might suck at basketball, but who cares? Verdict, underrated. Ito Cabaretti, George Kittle, on his day, I think you mean to say best day, the best tight end in the NFL, but is inconsistent and injury prone. Well, when healthy, Kittle is the closest thing to prime Gronk the NFL has right now. Problem for him, as you said, and as it was with Gronk, is staying on the field. He does everything at a very high level, especially blocking, which is rare to see in a tight end nowadays. To me, it's a toss-up for best tight end in the league between him and Travis Kelce. He also used to follow me on Twitter, not to brag, so I take full credit for his success. Verdict, properly rated. Tommy Sheffield, love your content, Barry. Thank you. Here's one, pancakes. It's always either pancakes, waffles, or French toast, so what's your thoughts on pancake? Well, there are some foods, like pizza, for example, that are almost impossible to screw up. I think pancakes are another one of those foods. Yeah, they're not good for you, but who gives a shit? I love stuffing my fucking face with that shit. Verdict, underrated. David Barufi. Hi, Barry, first-time commenter, long-time fan. I'm curious how you would rank Joe Buck. Joe Buck gets way too much hate. I think he's excellent at his job, although in fairness, he did used to be pretty bland about a decade ago. However, he has really turned it around the last 5 or 6 years and does a great job calling a game. Him, Mike Tirico, and Al Michaels are the best play-by-play guys in the business. Verdict, underrated. Wapa Witted Draco. What are your thoughts on Ryan Gosling? Personally, I think he's underrated, easily one of the greatest actors I've ever seen on screen. He nails every single one of his roles perfectly. I want to know your thoughts on him. Well, I am not gay, but I also have no problem admitting the obvious when a guy is really handsome, like Brad Pitt, Chris Hemsworth, or Henry Cavill, for example. However, and I swear I'm not being a hater, I've never understood the obsession with Gosling's looks. I do enjoy him as an actor, but to me, he just looks like an average dude. But hey, he gets to sleep with Eva Mendes every night, so the joke's on me. Verdict, properly rated as an actor, overrated in look. Caleb, Lasagna. I feel it's very overrated by the Garfield franchise. I've always found it kind of gross. Well, you're right. Lasagna has gotten a lot of undeserved publicity over the years from the fact that a fictional orange cat has a fetish for it. I've tried it a few times and I was never that impressed. I think it also gave me explosive diarrhea once. A much less heralded food like chicken marsala is 100 times better. Verdict, overrated. Wilo, Labrador Labrador Retriever. Well, I'm a sucker for dogs in general, but especially labs, as I have owned 2 yellow labs in my life. As puppies, they can sometimes be evil little fuckers, but it's not their fault, alright? As they get older, they become great companions and will always be there for you. The only bad thing about labs, or any dog really, is that eventually you'll have to say goodbye to them and it absolutely kills you inside. Verdict: very good dog. Yammerman. Jim Boeheim. He has had a quantity of winning seasons in his career as head coach, but has only won a single championship. I don't know how to feel about this, so I will see how you feel about this, Barry. Well, one thing about Jim Boeheim is that he is pedal to the metal. He's still going strong after nearly 50 years at Syracuse, and this is because he always keeps his foot on the gas no matter what. He doesn't have as many titles as you'd expect, and some of his seasons have felt like car crashes, but they're usually just bumps in the road, and Syracuse quickly gets back to running over opponents. Verdict: overrated. Nick Fade. Joe Mixon. Huge Bengals fan and curious what you think of his NFL career thus far. Cheers. Cheers as well. Mixon packs a hell of a punch for a man his size. He's a major threat with the ball in his hands, and now that since he's actually relevant again for the first time in like 30 years, I expect him to keep churning out Pro Bowl seasons and be viewed as a top running back in the league. Verdict: properly rated. Soul Knife 20. Chipper Jones. Face of the Braves for 20 years. Hall of Famer, but was he overrated? Hurts to ask this as he's my favorite player of all time, but it is a question that needs to be asked. It is a very, very serious and important question, I agree. I don't think Chipper Jones, the baseball player, was overrated at all. He was very consistent and is a deserving Hall of Famer. He's actually extremely underrated when it comes to respecting women, especially Hooters waitresses. He's an incredible man of faith, much like Tom Brenneman. Verdict: properly rated. Ben Marino. D'Angelo Russell. I will never understand why D'Angelo Russell has a dedicated stan base, considering he fucking stinks. He's the basketball equivalent of fast food. Lots of empty calories that make you feel good momentarily before you realize in the big picture you actually hurt yourself coming into contact with it. There's a reason he's been traded so many times. Verdict: overrated. Mighty Midget. Von Miller. He had an all-time great Super Bowl performance, then kind of went quiet for a few years before getting a second life in LA. Do you think Buffalo paid too much for him? I think Buffalo absolutely overpaid for Von Miller at this stage of his career, so in that sense, I guess you can say he's overrated, but I don't know how anybody can say his career is overrated. He's going to make the Hall of Fame, and his 2015 postseason is the stuff of legends. I just wish he didn't use marijuana early in his career. Verdict: overrated now, properly rated career. Matthew Siniard. Jose Canseco, the bumbling yet extremely roided up and powerful hitter. Canseco is a snitch and a clown, and his post-baseball career has ruined his reputation forever, so it's hard for people to remember that at one point in the early 90s, he was on pace to put up Hall of Fame numbers. He did have some real talent, but obviously his juicing helped him tremendously. I will say though, his tweets hating on Alex Rodriguez are hilarious and legendary. He also has a hot daughter. Verdict: properly rated. 42 Duncan. Barbecue sauce. I think it is superior to ketchup, but I would like to hear your thoughts. I don't mind barbecue sauce on ribs, but other than that, no. People who put barbecue sauce instead of ketchup on things like fries and burgers are psychopaths and should be taken in by the police immediately. Verdict: overrated. Stolte, I think. Kyler Murray. He just got an absolutely huge contract and people are calling him overpaid and a choker. As a Cardinals fan, I am hoping he has a good future. What is your opinion? The Cardinals just gave Kyler $250 million before outing him as a guy who plays video games instead of studying film. Pair this with how he declines every year as the season goes on. I wouldn't say he's held in the highest regard right now across the league, so it's hard for him to be overrated. At least he doesn't have any sexual assault lawsuits against him like another quarterback who got a massive contract extension this offseason. Verdict: properly rated. Satan. Oh, hello, Satan. Kyle Korver, one of the best catch and shooters of all time, but never gets the credit he deserves. Well, Korver had a long and very respectable career as a sharpshooter, but I wouldn't say he was overlooked. For me, as a LeBron fan, I will never be able to forget how he missed a crucial open three late in Game 3 of the 2017 Finals, and then shot 6.3% in the 2018 Finals. It's just impossible for me to believe still. He seems like a great guy, though. I'd let my wife bang him. Verdict: properly rated. And finally, Kerry Wells. Adam Sandler. People see him as a B-rate movie star, but he has tons of movies he's in that are actually pretty good. Look, Sandler's run in the mid to late 90s when he put out Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, The Wedding Singer, The Waterboy, and Big Daddy in succession will always prevent him from being overrated to me. Sure, his career since then has been mostly misses, but he's still put out good films like 8 Crazy Nights, The Longest Yard remake, and Uncut Gems. The Waterboy in particular will always be the best football movie ever. Verdict: properly rated.